Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of friendly faces. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know yet. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Keegan Cook. I'm the staff director for Stanford Ecopreneurship. This is a joint initiative between the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability and the Graduate School of Business. This room and this conference is filled with ecopreneurs, investors, industry leaders, faculty and staff here at Stanford, and the students who will be the sustainability leaders of tomorrow. It'll be a great day of sharing stories and knowledge and building new connections to bolster our collective realism, our collective optimism, and our collective mission to create a future in which humans and nature thrive in concert and in perpetuity. This event represents a grand collaboration between several parties at Stanford, including Stanford Ecopreneurship, the Sustainability Conference Series, the Precourt Institute for Energy, and the Sustainability Accelerator. This event is also the result of tireless efforts of the GSB events team. When we first pitched this event to them, we said it was probably going to be about 10 speakers and maybe an audience of about 40 people. They've been so kind to us and patient with us as we practice our own form of scaling. We now have 75 speakers for today and an audience of about 300 to 400 throughout the day. Now, it's my great pleasure to pass the mic off to someone who I admire and have the great pleasure of working with. He's the faculty co-director of Stanford Ecopreneurship, faculty director of Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, professor of entrepreneurship, professor of operations, information technology at the Graduate School of Business. Please help me in welcoming Professor Stefanos Zenios.
Thank you, Keegan. Good morning, everyone. So I'm the co-director of the Ecopreneurship program, and I want to tell you a little bit about the theme of the conference. So I'm a business school professor. So when we started thinking about scaling, in business schools, usually we think about scaling through the lenses of business models. Can business models scale up? Now, I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with Yi, my co-director for the program, and I learned that people across the street sometimes think of scaling in different ways. Can technology scale up? Is there the infrastructure there? How about regulation? So we thought this would be a fascinating theme for a conference that can help us explore what are the steps to scaling up innovations in the sustainability space? What are the barriers? How do entrepreneurs on the ground that they try to scale those innovations discover and understand those challenges and overcome them? And what is the range of challenges that exist as we are trying to scale up those innovations? Because at the end of the day, you can scale a business model, but if you cannot scale a business model at a planet level, you're not going to be able to have sustainable innovations that will make a difference. So that is the theme for the conference for today. I want to thank Keegan for helping us organize and herd all the cats and make it possible to have a conference. Also, Andrea Gray from the Accelerator and Jimmy Chen from the Precourt Institute have been great partners as we're putting the conference together. So with that said, we're ready to get started. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Will Chueh, who will talk about scaling decarbonization technologies for the whole planet. Will is an associate professor of material sciences and engineering, of photon science, and senior fellow at the Precourt Institute for Energy. He also serves as the chief scientific advisor and co-founder of MitraChem, which is commercializing iron-based cathode materials to enable mass market electrification in transportation and energy storage. So please join me in welcoming Will.
Thank you, Stefanos, for the kind introduction, and Keegan and Yi for organizing this wonderful event. Great to see everyone, and good morning. So what I want to do this morning, maybe for about 15 minutes, is to share some of our recent learnings. We've been doing a very careful look back on several of the technologies that have been scaled for sustainability. And there's a lot of common threads. But before I do that, let me just calibrate and get everyone on the same page on the major mismatch in timescale. If you look at all the numbers coming out from the IPCC and other entities, if we continue to emit at the current rate without change, it will only take 7 years for the temperature to rise to 1.5 degrees C above the pre-industrial levels. It will take about a little bit less than 30 years for 2 degrees C. So that's the time scale of the challenge we're facing with. What is the time scale of the solution? Well, if we look back at technologies as simple as refrigerators and television to things like wind and nuclear, the time it takes to develop a technology and to scale it to the first 1% deployment is on the order of 30 to 40 years. So if you compare those two timescales, it's grossly incompatible, therefore motivating today's discussion on how we can scale solutions for sustainability faster. Let me share with you the learnings looking back at the solar industry, on the nuclear industry, and also more recently on the EV industries as well. So in terms of the technologies that we require to decarbonize, we first must recognize that much of the solutions being decarbonized are actually, in fact, commodities. Miles transported, electricity, heat, steel, cement, food. And because they're commodities, that means cost will dominate the value delivered to the customers. And these are extremely common ingredients to all the more advanced technology that must be developed as well. So this is really an important realization on my part. As a scientist engineer, we often think, performance and differentiation is number one. But at the end, when it comes to commodity, think about miles being driven. It really doesn't matter exactly how you get from point A to point B. So in terms of the common things by looking back, one of the first important learnings we had was the need to identify and also to establish markets and incentives that will allow us to finance the learning curves to reach cost parity with incumbents. Because these are commodity markets, incumbents are everywhere. Let me give the example of electric vehicles. There was a really great story of how battery technology that started with selling to the camcorder industry, that's where the cylindrical batteries came from Sony in 1993, gradually made its way through consumer electronics, communications, then to premium and exotic electric car, and now to mass market electric cars. And all of the learnings were enabled by incremental markets that were able to get the cost down just by a small amount to get to where we're today. It's a truly fantastic story of lowering the cost of batteries from over $2,000 per kilowatt hour at the battery cell level to now close to $100. And having those markets in place and the incentive to do so was paramount. This is not so simple for some of the other industries we talked about due to the absence of large enough markets to finance that initial part of the learning curve. So something for everyone to think about when it comes to cement and steel. How do we finance those learning curves? The second learning, which was a hard one that came to me more recently in my own entrepreneurial experience, is to understand the trade-off between the degree of disruption and scalability. Often, and as an innovator, we think we must disrupt fully, but almost always, when you have that degree of disruption, the scalability is also very challenging. I think one thing for us to embrace is drop-in, and drop-in has many meanings. Drop-in in terms of the use cases, drop-in in terms of manufacturability, drop-in in terms of market design. Let me mention one example. LED light bulbs, one of the fastest penetration to market, took less than 20 years. One of the fastest learning rate. I think the reason why it was adopted so quickly was because it is truly drop-in the use case level. I can unscrew a light bulb and screw it back on. It required almost no change to the consumer behavior. Borrowing from other and adjacent industry is another important aspect of drop-in as well. For example, the battery material industry for EV now is borrowing from the glass industry. So these are not traditionally industry that mix, but there are not only technology available, there are also manufacturing capacity available as well. And this could represent a big opportunity to think about how to balance that trade-off between disruption and scalability. The third learning is embracing the importance of non-technological innovations. And I think this is a hugely important topic. I'm glad that we're having this meeting at the GSB to think about innovations in business model, innovations in decreasing soft cost. Solar is a terrific example. Under the leadership of Steve Chueh, the Sunshot program really solved the decline in the installation cost of solar, which really drove down the cost of solar overall, because at the end of full market deployment, more than 50% of the cost came from the balance of systems, such as installation. So that is a big non-technological component toward decreasing cost. The final point I want to make in terms of learnings is really to think about how to achieve a high degree of resonance between the private-led investments as well as the government-led policy. It sounds very simple, but the intricacy could not be overstated. Let me mention one example, and my colleague Pulakech Mukherjee and I are developing a course around this, is to think about how the Montreal Protocol came to light. This is the movement that allows us to eliminate CFC as a refrigerant, which is a major greenhouse gas. And there it was really the coming together of the scientific community to recognize the chemistry of CFC reacting with ozone, the observation of the ozone shrinking, the activism to rule out CFC, and also industry having ready-to-scale solutions to replace it. And those elements came together very, very quickly, and over about a one-decade period, we were able to begin to phase out. And policy really was a big part of it. Even before the solution was available at scale, the policy already called for a 2x reduction in the refrigerant. So I hope these learnings give you a little bit of sense on what has gotten us to the point we are today. The challenge for all of us is very simple. Although we have all of these learnings, we need to think about doing the same thing at about 3 times the pace. And as a faculty member in the Dorr School and at Stanford, I'm very excited to be brainstorming with everyone on some of the best practices in technology and beyond, and how we can accelerate our decarbonization efforts. Thank you. Stavros, do we have time for some questions? Okay, wonderful. Happy to take any questions as well. Or comments.
I have a question. So I was intrigued when you talk about I was intrigued when you said how the battery industry is drawing lessons from the glass industry. Can you elaborate on that?
So it turns out glasses are one of the most inexpensive things you can make at extremely large volume and speed. So both are material-centric processing. So we're trying to turn impure raw material into high-grade glass or battery materials. So it's a material problem. But the process for making glass, because it's so cost-sensitive, and the speed has to be so fast, many of those methods are now, we're looking at transferring them to the battery industry. So this is 2 industries that do not talk at all traditionally. So over the next decade or so, I think you're going to see a lot of these coming together of adjacent industries with the focus not necessarily on new formulations or otherwise, but the combination of very different processing in order to get the same thing, but cheaper.
My name is Anup Pradhan. I'm CEO at Vajra Power. So I'd like to connect what Professor Zenius and you talked about, basically planetary scale versus learnings. So I see that learnings and technology, knowledge, capital is coming up here, is being deployed here. But my question is about emerging markets. So to get to the speed that you talked about, what's your recommendation on propagating these same, let me say, instruments to get to scale speedily towards emerging markets?
I think one important ingredient here is the policy as a catalyst. So how do we interact with our colleagues in Washington and globally on identifying and also investing in those emerging markets? I think one of the big opportunity is how do we make those markets large enough? Because often these markets are very, very small, and they're not enough to really drive down the cost curve. But if we can enlarge them through government incentives, then it could be above critical in terms of market size. I'm not an expert in this topic, but I really enjoy learning about it. In the EV industry, it really worked out that each one of these small segments was just enough to get the cost down. And the government policy played a big role in it. For example, the EV tax rebate at the federal level. So I think more strategies such as those to increase promising but small emerging markets to drive down the cost curve could be something that comes between the public and the private as well.
Yeah, thank you. There are big emerging markets too. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Max Flower. Thank you for your presentation. You started off by discussing the race for solving climate change. And is there one thing on the horizon in your focus that you're really excited about that's a game changer that is very promising?
I think, as a chemist, I tend to think about what type of new chemistries can we develop. But increasingly, I'm also, as mentioned earlier, thinking about the process. How do we make the same thing, but at 1/10 the capital cost? I think, given today's climate, CapEx could be a major limiting factor. So figuring out how to make things with much less investment could be a huge game changer across all industries. And that's something that we're thinking deeply about at Stanford as well. Thank you. All right, thank you so much.